Stewart Williams. I am a professor of psychology at the University of Nottingham in Malaysia, and I'm also the author of the book The Ape That Understood the Universe, which has just come out in its first Korean edition. So I've got a bunch of questions here that the publisher has given to me that I'm going to go through one by one, and I'll just give you some answers to those questions as I go through them. So let's start with the first one. So the first one is, could you please give us a brief introduction to your book, The Ape That Understood the Universe? So I could indeed give you a brief introduction. So basically the book is about human nature and about human culture. It's about what makes us who we are and why we do the things that we do. The book kicks off and it begins with what's called the Aliens Report. I call it the Aliens Report, which is just a report from a hypothetical alien from another world who comes to our world and is just mystified by these animals that he finds here, aka us. So mystified by us, really puzzled by the different things that we do. So for instance, puzzled by the fact that human beings come in two main types, men and women, and these two main types are different from one another, but not as different as, say, male and female gorillas or male and female peacocks. The alien is puzzled by the fact that we fall in love, puzzled by the fact that we get really upset if the person that we fall in love with gets involved with somebody else. The alien would have other questions like, so why do we care so much about our genetic relatives? Okay, and why are we always so much more willing to help our genetic relatives than non-relatives? And then looking more closely, it'll be even more puzzled by the fact that often actually we do help non-relatives as well, which is really atypical in the animal kingdom. Helping relatives, very common, but helping non-relatives, which we seem to do a lot, that's very uncommon. It makes us very different than most other animals. And there are just many mysteries like this. Why do we have, for instance, these cultural artifacts like religion and like art and music and science, etc., etc. And the whole idea of the rest of the book is to try to explain those things using tools from two disciplines. The first one is evolutionary psychology, which takes theories from evolutionary biology and applies them to the human mind and behavior. That's the first one. And then the second one is cultural evolutionary theory. The next question is, what motivated me to write the book? No simple answer to that question. Lots of different things motivated me to write it. One thing was that the evolutionary behavioral sciences, so evolutionary psychology and cultural evolutionary theory, have been changing really fast over the last few decades. And I just wanted to write a book that would get all these new ideas that are bursting forth and just put it all into one place and give a sort of up-to-date overview of what we know about human nature and human culture. And that's what it's all about, really. And it's an area of science that I just personally find just deeply fascinating, and I really just wanted to share that with other people so that I can share this area of science that I think is so successful that deserves a much wider audience. It'd be great if more and more people knew it, and I just want to help try to share this fascinating, exciting, brilliant, somewhat controversial area of science. I just think it's great. Next question number 4. So in the book, the question goes, in the book you mention that many of the things that we think of as socially learned are actually the result of evolution by instinct. Could you please explain this with examples from the book, as well as real-life examples from day-to-day life? I guess the first thing I want to make clear is I don't actually think it's an either-or situation. I don't think we need to choose, is it either a product of culture and socialization and learning on the one hand, or is it a product of evolution? I think for most of the things that I discuss in the book, it's a mixture of both of those two things. Okay? And both of them are necessary to really understand what's going on, especially when it comes to all this basic kind of biological stuff like about basic motivations and basic differences between the sexes that you find across all different cultures, all these kind of things. The main examples that I use in terms of the evolution of human nature are, well, first of all, the fact that men on average are more interested in casual sex and no strings attached sex and in sexual variety for its own sake than women are. That's one difference. Another one that you just find across all different cultures is that on average men are more physically aggressive than women are. So more violent, in other words. Most men are not particularly violent, but most violence is perpetrated by men, and the more severe the violence is, the more likely it is that it's going to be perpetrated by men rather than women. there are various average sex differences in terms of mate preferences. So in other words, average differences in terms of what men look for in a long-term mate or romantic partner or spouse, versus average differences in what women look for in a long-term romantic partner, spouse, or mate. What else? I've alluded to already, actually, which is the fact that people everywhere tend to give more unreciprocated help to their genetic relatives than to non-relatives, and the more closely related those genetic relatives are to them, the more help they're willing to give them without any kind of strings attached. So the sort of archetypal example that we see in humans, but also in many other species as well, is the relationship between parents and their kids. And parents will often just do anything at all for their kids. And then one final example, slightly different example, would be that people everywhere tend to have a kind of aversion and kind of a disgust at the idea of mating with close kin. Okay? Incestuous liaisons. That seems to be something that we haven't just learned, and we could just as well have learned to be sexually attracted to our relatives as to anybody else. Instead, it just seems to be something quite deep-seated that we just very quickly learn who our relatives are and acquire a really, really quite deep-seated aversion to the prospect of getting sexually or romantically involved with them. Next question is about the chapter number 2, which looks at humanity through the lens of evolutionary theory. For readers who are not very familiar with evolutionary theory, could you explain human beings in terms of evolutionary theory and evolutionary psychology? Well, basically, so evolutionary psychology, that's my main field. Evolutionary psychology takes theories from evolutionary biology and it uses them to try to shed light on the human mind and human behavior. So simple example, probably the easiest way to get a grip on what we're trying to do as evolutionary psychologists is to look at how evolutionary biologists explain anatomical features in other animals. So I'll give you 2 examples, my 2 favorite examples. Example number 1 would be lions. You can imagine a question, it's a common kind of question that we get in evolutionary biology. Why do lions have these sharp fangs? So why did their sharp fangs evolve? Why are they useful? And the answer, of course, is that they evolved them because having sharp fangs is really, really useful in terms of capturing and devouring prey. So that's why that evolved. Question number 2, gazelles. Why does gazelles have super fast legs? Why did they evolve? And why are they useful? And the answer in that case, of course, is that they evolved their fast legs to try to rapidly escape from hungry lions and other hungry predators. That's why that was useful. Now, what evolutionary psychology does is that it imports that mode of explanation and it applies it to us, but it applies it specifically to our mind and to our behavior. It applies it to the fundamental constituents of the human mind. So, for instance, it applies it to basic emotions like fear. So we can say, just as we would ask, why did the lion evolve its sharp fangs? We can ask, why do human beings evolve the emotion of fear and the capacity to get afraid in certain situations? Pretty easy, right? The answer is that we evolved that because it motivates us to escape from threats or to avoid threats in the first place, right? So to step back from the edge of the cliff, to run away from a hungry lion, just as a gazelle might. Another example might be, why do we evolve the capacity for pain? Like pain is unpleasant, right? We dislike pain. It's something we try to avoid. So why would we evolve the capacity for pain? Well, the answer is that as unpleasant as it is, it's evolutionarily very, very useful. So pain motivates us to escape or to avoid something that causes tissue damage. Okay. Actually, it's got 2 functions. The first one is to escape from tissue damage. So say you put your hand too close to the fire and you whip it away because you feel that you feel the pain that the flame is inducing in your hand. The second function, though, is that if you do sustain an injury, so say you get a little bit burned by the fire, you will find that your fingers are going to be quite sensitive from then on, and they're going to hurt quite a bit if you I don't know, if you wrap them onto something or hit them on a door handle or something like that. And that has a slightly different function, which is to protect a wound, which is a vulnerability, while it heals. So that's fear, that's pain. Those are the evolutionary functions of those 2 things. Hunger, thirst. I think you can probably imagine what the evolutionary explanations for those kind of things would be. So that's what evolutionary psychology is. What I think makes it particularly interesting, though, is that it doesn't just apply it to basic emotions and basic motivations like fear and hunger and thirst. It also applies it to other more complicated aspects of human nature, and actually it applies it to a lot of things that a lot of people, a lot of psychologists would want to explain in non-evolutionary terms. They would want to explain it primarily in terms of learning, socialization, culture, that kind of thing. All right, so another question is the third chapter. I think it's probably my favorite chapter, actually, and maybe my favorite piece of writing that I've done so far. Third chapter analyzes humans from a genetic point of view, and it focuses in particular on sex differences, on differences between men and women. And the question is, are they due to genetic factors or social learning? And is this something you can cut to the chase and say which is correct and which is not? Well, I can cut to the chase, but I can't say which is correct and which is not, because again, it's not an either-or situation. It's another matter where you have a culture and human nature interacting. So there's a push from the genes, but the genes are the only thing that shapes us. We also have a push from other factors, including culture and just the life that we happen to have led. Now, we know both are involved. So we know, first of all, that culture is involved, because we know that sex differences, we tend to find the same sex differences across culture after culture after culture, but they're not always the same size. Sometimes they're larger, sometimes they're smaller. Sometimes there are some that you find in 99% of cultures, but they're actually absent in 1% of cultures, that kind of thing. So we know because of the variance across cultures that it couldn't just all be down to genes. And it's not just across cultures; it's across times as well. Within the same culture over time, the nature of men's behaviour and women's behaviour does change quite a bit. So culture must be involved. But we also know that it's not just culture. We know for a lot of these kind of basic sex differences and aggression and sexual behaviour and the like, we know that they're not just culture for several reasons. One is because the sex differences are very, very, even though they change across cultures, they're very, very persistent across cultures in a way that really wouldn't be expected if it were just down to culture. We'd expect much more variation if it were just down to culture. For a lot of sex differences, we know that there are correlations between prenatal hormonal exposure and the behaviour that we see later within sex, and because of course there's an average difference in prenatal hormonal exposure to testosterone, estrogen, etc. It's very, very plausible. That really makes it very, very plausible that prenatal hormonal exposure is helping shape these average differences between men and women. There are various other lines of evidence as well. One is that not only do you find these differences across cultures, you also often actually find them even when the culture tries to eliminate them. So the culture is pushing against these different sex differences, and the sex differences persist. And I think this is very interesting. My favorite way to put this is I say that a lot of sex differences we find actually persist despite culture rather than because of culture. And then maybe the most compelling and most persuasive line of evidence that a lot of the sex differences we see in our species are actually evolutionary products is the fact that we see similar sex differences in other species. So we see similar sex differences, not in all other species, but in species that have a similar evolutionary backstory to our own species. It's a very, very compelling evidence, I think, that when we find the same sex differences in our species, that those differences are not just down to culture or whatever else. It would just be too much of a coincidence, right? If you find these differences, like the sex difference in aggression, for instance, you find these in all these other mammalian species. It would just be really, really a strange coincidence if we found exactly the same sex difference in our species. But in our case alone, it was just for a completely different reason, an entirely different reason. In our case, it's due to culture and socialization and the rest, which just happens supposedly coincidentally to have replicated the difference that we see in most other species that are subject to similar selection pressures to us. Next question is about chapter 4. So this chapter analyzes human males and females from mating to parenting. From an evolutionary perspective, would you say that monogamy in modern day society is an appropriate system? Now that's a tricky one, right? Because that's getting into what we ought to do. It's like a moral question, and I would say that the evolutionary perspective doesn't answer that question. Okay, it tells us why we see certain trends in behaviour, but it doesn't tell us what we should do. So I can't answer that question directly. I would say stepping outside of the evolutionary framework, is monogamy an appropriate system? Well, it is for some people, and it's not for others. For plenty of people, it is. I think we have evolved to fall in love. I think we've evolved to form pair bonds. And often pair bonds are the context for raising kids, if you have kids. But that's not to say that it's not to say that it suits everybody. It's not to say that we should do it necessarily if it doesn't suit us. And there are other arrangements that plenty of people find just fine. So my recommendation would be to, if you want to read the book will help tell you why we are the way we are. But if you want to figure out how you should live your life, this might inform it in some ways. It might just sort of make you think, okay, well, I'm the kind of person who's going to fall in love. I'm the kind of person who's going to get jealous. This isn't jealous if my partner gets involved with somebody else. This isn't just something that was created by culture. It's more deep-seated. I might not be able to just cast it off that easily. And that, you might want to bear that in mind when you decide what kind of lifestyle is going to suit you best. But ultimately, it is just down to, I don't know, I guess a trial and error process to find out what suits you best, what you like, and different people like different things. Next question is about Chapter 5. The question is, according to the book, is altruism 100% the result of selfish genes? And you might actually be able to guess the angle. I'm going to say no, it's not 100% due to selfish genes. I'd go further and say actually that basically nothing in psychology is 100% due to anything, to any one thing, right? All different kinds of behavior in human beings are determined by many, many different factors. The genes are just one among those many factors. That said, though, it's also the case that it's not 100% due to culture or learning either. Okay? There is actually an innate push, if you like, toward being altruistic, for a number of reasons and in a number of contexts. So the first reason and the first context is, I've touched on this already, is kin altruism. So because we share genes at an above chance rate with our genetic relatives, we have evolved just a propensity to be more willing to help out genetic relatives than non-relatives, okay? With no strings attached, and our relationships with our genetic relatives are often sturdier than those with non-relatives. Now, perhaps you're thinking, well, you know, I know somebody, or maybe you yourself, have fallen out with family. And that obviously does happen. It does happen quite a bit. But it does seem to be the case that on average, it's easier to fall out with non-relatives than with relatives. And that's due to shared genes. And that's based on a theory called kin selection theory. We also seem, though, to have evolved to be altruistic to non-relatives as well in certain kind of different contexts. One theory that looks at this is called reciprocal altruism theory. And the idea, in a nutshell, is that we've evolved to trade favors with one another without really thinking about it. We just automatically kind of trade favors with other people. When you first meet somebody, you often want to put your best foot forward and you help them out. And if they help you back, you can get into this kind of reciprocal exchange situation, which we would normally call like a friendship, right? It's a friendship that we have with somebody else. And then at the same time, if the other person doesn't reciprocate, kind of doesn't pull their weight in the relationship, in the friendship, well, we get pretty unhappy about that. We maybe we're more unhappy about it than we might be if genetic relatives don't really pull their weight, you know, and we give to genetic relatives, maybe not too happy about that, but we're even less happy if it's give to non-relatives and they don't reciprocate. And then finally, there's a third theory as well, which is that perhaps to some degree, altruistic behavior, helping people out, it's kind of like a human equivalent of the peacock's tail, right? So the peacock has an amazing tail. I'm sure you all know what it looks like. It's colourful, it's large, ornately patterned, beautiful tail. And that is basically a way to impress and attract mates. And the idea is that altruism serves the same function for human men and women, so not just men in this case. In the peacock, it's just the male that displays and shows off. Our species is a bit different. We have mutual mate choice, so actually both sexes display and compete among members of the same sex to attract mates, not just the males. And the thought is that altruism is one of the ways in which we try to impress mates. Okay? Next chapter is a question about chapter 6. Chapter 6 is a long chapter and it's all about culture. And the question is, can you give us a brief explanation of meme theory and tell us an example related to evolution and memes? Okay, so a theory that I outline in chapter 6 is called memetics. And this traces back to the great Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist. And he argued, well, he defined a meme as a unit of culture. So it's anything like an idea or a word or a practice or a ritual or a tool or anything like that that can be passed on by social learning. That's a meme. And the idea, the central idea in memetics is that you have a form of natural selection operating among different memes in a culture. So natural selection, as we usually think of it, operates on genes within a gene pool. But when we're talking about memetic evolution, cultural evolution, we're talking about selection among memes, selection among units of culture. And then the question is, which memes are going to prosper in the culture? Which are going to be selected and stick around in the culture? And the very, very intriguing answer that you get from memetics is that, well, often memes are going to be, items of culture that help us as individuals or families. Sometimes they're going to be items of culture that help the group as a whole, but not necessarily. Okay? And the real bottom line is that ultimately memes, they don't have to help us necessarily, that they don't have to help the group necessarily. Ultimately, to stick around in the culture, they have to help themselves. Now, what does it mean to say that a gene helps itself? It's not a conscious thing, right? What it means, though, is that the memes that stick around are memes that have effects on us, on people, that cause those memes to stick around longer in the culture. So say you got a meme, say you got a catchy tune. That's a good example, like an earworm, a catchy tune. That has a property that makes it likely to stick around in the culture, which is that it's really, really memorable, right? We're exposed to a catchy tune, it sticks in our brain, we start humming it and whistling it, and then it passes on to somebody else. Somebody else hears us humming or whistling, and then they pick up the meme. And they hate us for it because now the meme is stuck in their minds and they don't like that. They pass it on and so on. And the idea of memetics is that all of culture actually can be analysed in that way. In a sense, all of culture is just a big, vast collection of catchy earworms and catchy memes like earworms. Could you please explain the knowledge and know-how that can be gained from the ape that understood the universe and how it would be useful in real life? Okay, good question. Tricky question. I'll give you I'll answer it in a few different ways. The first way, and what for me I think is the main benefit that I get out of these kind of ideas, is just the joy of understanding how the world works and understanding how we work. In particular, is particularly interesting because we are ourselves, right? We're particularly interested in ourselves and how we work. And the joy that you get from that is the main thing I get out of the kind of ideas that I detail in The Ape That Understood the Universe, and the kind of non-fiction in general that I enjoy reading. It's just the joy of understanding. And I see that as an end in itself rather than just a means to other ends, like doing better at work or whatever else. It's an end in itself, just like eating is an end in itself, and having friends is an end in itself. It's one of our kind of basic needs. So Aristotle, many thousands of years ago, Aristotle argued that humans have a hunger for knowledge for its own sake. And I think popular science books, like The Ape That Understood the Universe, help to feed that hunger, and they help to enrich people's lives, and that is maybe the single biggest benefit that we get out of these kind of books. And I don't think it's a trivial benefit. I think it's a great benefit to learn to love knowledge for its own sake. So knowledge for its own sake, it's fun, it's interesting. Is it beyond them? Is there any kind of practical benefit beyond them? And I'll say two things about that. One is that I think you need to be a bit careful when you start going down that path. The first thing to say about that is most of the time, the ideas that you read in a book like this shouldn't determine what you do. So there's an error that people often make when they first come in contact with ideas like these, which is they think, okay, so this behavior and that behavior and the other behavior, these are natural, they're evolved, and so therefore that's what we should do. They're natural, therefore good. Now that's a fallacy of reasoning. It's a common enough fallacy of reasoning that it's got its own name, and the name is the naturalistic fallacy. And it's a fallacy because in a Darwinian universe, there's really no reason at all to think that the way things have evolved to be is going to mesh with our ideas of what's right and wrong. Okay, so some things that have evolved are very, very nice. Altruism is the classic example. That's something good. But plenty of stuff has evolved that is not good at all and is quite unpleasant. So the fact that something has evolved doesn't tell you whether it's good or bad or anywhere in between. The fact that something hasn't evolved, the fact that something goes against nature even, doesn't tell us whether it's good or bad or somewhere in between. So to make that point, I'll give you some examples. One example is that just kind of the propensity for violence. Violence is usually a bad thing, right? I think we agree. Violence is a pretty bad thing most of the time, but the propensity for violence has an evolutionary origin. Another example, the flip side of this would be medicine. So medicine basically goes against the course of nature. We're deliberately defying the course of nature when we intervene to try to save people's lives, save people's limbs, eradicate diseases. We don't want them to take their natural course, and so we're going against nature. But of course, medicine is a very, very good thing. One of the great things, one of the great cultural inventions of our species. So that's what it says. Don't take advice from this book in the sense of saying this is what has evolved, therefore this is how I should live my life. At the same time, though, I think that there are ways in which maybe understanding the nature of human nature could help inform our decisions about what we should do. Not because it's natural. We would never say we should do this because it's natural. But by understanding what is natural, we can sometimes understand what's possible for us and what's changeable and what's less changeable, that kind of thing. So I think I've touched on this example already, So jealousy, romantic jealousy. The fact that we get very, very jealous and upset, most people do, get jealous and upset when someone that we're in love with and involved with cheats on us, gets involved with somebody else. Now, some people might think that, okay, well, that's just something that we learned, right, from culture, and so we can just throw it overboard, and you know, I don't mind. Maybe we'll get involved in a polyamorous relationship and try that kind of thing. Now, that does work for some people, so I'm certainly not saying people shouldn't do that, but for a lot of people, that kind of relationship isn't going to work. An open relationship or a polyamorous relationship not going to work for everyone, and a lot of people, it's just really going to be quite upsetting for them. And if they're aware that the jealousy that they feel in that kind of context, they're probably not just going to be able to throw it off as easily as they might, change a rule or change a school curriculum or whatever else, because it's not a cultural product. Well, then maybe that's going to inform their decision that maybe going down that path might not suit them, right? So they're going to instead opt for a non-open relationship. Like I say, though, people are different. Different individuals are different, and there are some people for whom that kind of relationship does work well. But just knowing the origins of these kind of emotional propensities that we have, and these desires and drives that we have, just can inform our decisions in trying to construct a life for ourselves that is as happy as possible.